All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us for this webinar on using AI to unlock insights while staying compliant. We'll be speaking from a couple of different locations. I'm in Toronto, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Private AI, Microsoft-backed startup focused on embedding privacy into developer workflows. And Steve, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Patricia. My name's Steve Hazelton. I'm one of the founders of Sturdy. You can find us at sturdy.ai. In a previous life, I started another company called Newton, which we sold to Paycor a number of years ago. And not to get ahead of ourselves, but we just realized when you go from kind of a small to medium-sized business to a very large one, really understanding what's driving revenue, what's keeping your customers happy, what's not, who's doing a good job and who's not, becomes extraordinarily difficult. So that's the problem we're trying to solve with AI today. We can kind of walk through that too.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A box. We'll answer them at the end of the session, and the session will be recorded and available for anybody that register within a week. Thank you. Take it away, Steve.
All right. So I guess that when we're talking about AI, we need to start with the crux of the problem, which is data. Um, the way Sturdy looks at this problem, I guess to kind of introduce the problem we're trying to solve, there's a, don't quote me on this, I believe it's MIT says that about 80 to 90% of the data inside of your business right now is unstructured. And only about 1% of that is being analyzed. And unstructured data is all that's documents, but it's also emails, it's recorded phone calls, it's tickets, it's the content of what's going in and out of your business. In our case, between your customers, and the way I look at that is what your customers are saying and what you're saying to them is extraordinarily valuable information. But oftentimes, or almost always, it's read once and wasted. And the other challenge there is that it's parked in hundreds of silos across your business, right? And so you can look at Salesforce as a silo, Zendesk as a silo, HubSpot as a silo, but then you have a silo for every single one of your people. Every email inbox is its own little silo. There's no way for Patricia to say, what's going on with Acme Corp? And to search my email to find out. And this leads to some kind of sad things in business. I think one of the saddest things, I was a salesperson in an earlier life, and when you start a new sales job, there's a little folder in your Outlook of the last person who did the job, so you can search and find out what they were working on. And that's just speaks to the problem. So the challenge of unstructured data, of course, is first you have to collect all of this data, or we should even say it's not data yet, right? It's this unstructured information. And you have to organize this. You have to find the people, the products, the relationships inside of that. And you need to organize that. Then you need to analyze it, understand it, and then, of course, take action on that. And I think the problem is today, going back to another study, not to just spout studies here, is that Salesforce, the company, remarkably came out with a study. They surveyed 6,000 salespeople. This came out about a month ago. That salespeople are spending less than 30% of their time every day actually selling. So what are they doing, right? They're manually updating a system. They're logging something if it's important. They're getting people into a room, and they're doing some meeting stuff. And I think anybody who's listening to this webinar right now, if you've ever worked for a company that's, I think thankfully when you're in a startup, there's about 90% of your day is doing things. But when you get in a large company, like a CS person at a large company, they're logging things to Jira. They're updating feature requests. They're updating project plans. And the reason why we're doing this is because we have this vast, enormous raw data source, which is our customer conversations, that's not being analyzed. And the only way we extract that information is by people manually updating those systems. And so to get to kind of the crux here, I think the last kind of 20 or 30 years of software development has been about building more and more screens which results in more and more silos, which results in more and more logging. And so we hear people constantly, and then there's yet another study. I can probably post these links after this, where Harvard Business Reviews surveyed several thousand knowledge workers, and they say 41% of their day is doing some sort of task that somebody else could do, and it's not fulfilling. Um, and I look at the outputs of that as two things. One, our people have unfulfilling jobs because they're logging and searching and hunting for the data they need to do their job. And the second part is our customers are living in a world where we're not able to service them effectively. Um, it's like I bought a pair of ski pants years ago. First chair, the zipper fell out. I called Burton. I sent him back. They sent me a replacement. First chair, zipper fell out. The remarkable thing about it is, how did Burton not know this was happening? I'm not the only person who rolled the dice and got the only two pair of ski pants in the entire world that had this problem. They had a supply chain issue that was being communicated to them in unstructured data, and they weren't analyzing it. And so they kept sending out ski pants like this. And how much money did that cost them? I guarantee they figured it out at the end of the quarter. So the problem with this is every business will agree this is valuable data, but how do we process this and analyze it? And today we do it. In the previous slide, I've been talking too long. Sorry, Patricia, but it takes too long for us to make decisions. There's bias and human error in the reporting of that data, which means that we make decisions based on a faulty data set. I worked in polling in my early life and politics. And there's this kind of straw poll factor of you ask people to self-report issues, and then you only get the people who are really mad or really happy, but you don't get the 90% in the middle or 80 or whatever that is. So it's really what we're in. And the reason why we're talking today about this topic is this is, first of all, this is how AI comes in, and this is how we look at this problem. And I guess some of the survey stuff is in here, or the studies are in here. I got ahead of myself. But how do you leverage AI to analyze this really rich, raw, untapped data source to make your people more efficient, to boost the amount of data that you know about your customers by 100-fold? And how do you do that in the most secure, privacy compliant manner? I would like to say, and take a pause there, the way I've always looked at privacy and security isn't, for me as a CEO and for our company and the companies I've run in the past, how do I put this? It's less for us about regulation, and it's more about this is what we have to do. This isn't a we're not doing this because we're afraid we're getting fined. We're doing this because this is what we would want people to do with our data. If we were submitting bugs and tickets or what have you. And I think for a long, long time, and it's still going on, I think folks need to take that more seriously. And when we talk about AI and we talk about ethics, there's these kind of fundamental principles we have at our company. And I think private AI certainly shares them as well, like how you use not only just AI, but technology in general, and how do you be a shepherd of the data that you're analyzing and adjusting or automating or whatever, and how do you do that in a manner that is safe as possible. I guess we can, when we talk, so again, getting ahead of myself in the script here, we were talking about ethical AI, and in the next slide, Patricia, there's this kind of industry concept that ethical AI refers to the development and deployment of AI in a manner that is fair, transparent, accountable, and respectful of user privacy, all the while minimizing harm and bias. I'd like to add to that it's also being used in a way that would be entirely obvious to another human being. So, for example, if you download a gas finding app, it helps you find gas stations. That's entirely obvious. What's not entirely obvious and what should not be built and where people should draw the line is to send your GPS data to your insurance company to tell them how fast you're driving so they know how to adjust your rates. This happened. There is a company that did this. One of the big insurers built an app for tracking users' speedometer or GPS speed. So ethical AI comes from this transparency and accountability aspect, but it also requires that when we're using AI, we use it in an entirely obvious way. We'll probably get into this as well. At Sturdy, we've drawn the line in the sand. We are not going to use AI to grade human beings. We're not going to use AI to surveil citizens. We use AI solely for the purpose of improving the understanding of customer interactions. And we only analyze data that is between a business and a customer. Full stop. No internal emails, no personal emails, no traffic cameras. And we have this on our site as well, if we use this, if we find a customer attempting to do that, then they have to get fired. So, Patricia, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I do. Yeah, I'll dive into ethical AI and what exactly that means,
Yeah.
and why it is that folks want to integrate ethical AI within their companies. So, a lot of the grounding work for ethical AI is around data privacy, and then there are all of these other pillars for ethical AI or and for trustworthy AI that are starting to become more and more important given the EU AI Act and other AI legislations that are starting to pop up globally. And you see a pretty interesting parallel there with regards to the data protection regulations that followed suit after the GDPR came into play in 2018. And then you started seeing a domino effect of various regions also putting their data protection regulations in place. And so what happened was these regions would, some of them, many of them, would take the GDPR as a bit of a framework and ended up copying quite a bit of it as part of it to their jurisdiction. And it's very likely that we're going to see a similar kind of domino effect with regards to the EU AI Act because companies, especially multinational organizations, have a quite a bit of cost to comply with the different legislations globally. And the more similar they are to one another, the easier it becomes for them to comply and not to have to change their data stack and their tech stack too much. And there are a few reasons why businesses do choose to comply with these regulations. Of course, there is the general legal obligation and the fines that can come with not complying. But in a lot of cases, it's actually even more important for organizations when they understand just exactly how much brand damage can come from not complying, how much customer loyalty can be easily shaken if you're not complying. But beyond that, it's also very much a competitive advantage and also allows you to get to market much faster, get new products to market much faster if you start thinking about these issues by design. And what we're seeing, of course, there's vertical specific legislation like HIPAA for healthcare within the United States. There is more general legislation like the GDPR and the EU AI Act that are rather complementary to one another. There's very regional, smaller region legislation like Law 25 in Quebec, which is one of the newer laws. And an interesting thing about it is that it's more prescriptive on what de-identification means. And these, of course, are popping up globally with many things in common with one another. Namely, the data minimization tends to be a common requirement, and understanding the kind of data that you have in order to actually be able to know what it is that you need to comply with and how. So fundamental pieces are understanding the personal information you're carrying and minimizing that personal information. And data minimization is a spectrum of anywhere from redacting things like credit card numbers and account numbers for PCI DSS standards compliance and all the way to anonymization where you're calculating a re-identification risk score, like for HIPAA, and using that data for sharing for secondary purposes beyond the purpose of care. And it really does all come down to trust. In this quote, it says, trustworthy AI is an approach to AI development that prioritizes safety and transparency for the people who interact with it. And if we look at NVIDIA's guiding principles for trustworthy AI, and there are several companies that have put out responsible AI guiding principles, trustworthy AI guiding principles, but they're all fairly similar in that there's the privacy pillar, where you need to comply with data protection regulations, but also privacy is very much about giving users control over their data. The safety and security pillar, and that is a whole new world when it comes to AI, with some really interesting research going on with regards to what you might have to pay attention to for web app vulnerabilities that you might not have had to pay attention to before, like ChatGPT being able to go to different websites and then those websites being able to access perform different commands depending on the memory that that ChatGPT has of the user. And an interesting thing to point out there is that the standard vulnerability assessments are not capable of addressing these issues at the moment. And MITRE and NIST are thinking about better ways of being able to tell organizations what it is that they should be paying attention to there. There's transparency, as Steve mentioned, and of course, bias and non-discrimination, as well as pillars of trustworthy AI. And one thing I want to point out is how privacy risks tend to be pretty complex in their nature because in AI in particular, because you're not looking at necessarily what the data flow is after a certain point. So once you train a model, you could still consider uh, that model is memorizing the personal information within the data that you've either used for training it or fine-tuning it. And in several cases, folks who have not paid attention to what it is that they were using for training or fine-tuning ended up with nasty surprises on the other end where the models were spewing out personal information in production. And that's not something that they necessarily knew about, knew that it would happen because it was unclear to them what exactly the models were doing. And now with text embeddings for RAG, for example, research has shown that even dense embeddings, which means vectors that are representing large amounts of text, uh, allow you to recover 92% of the data, roughly. And so they were able to recover personal information like full names, in this case from a data set of clinical notes. But what this is showing is when you're creating these embeddings with contextual data, it's another aspect where you need to be careful about what kind of personal information you have. So important to do a privacy impact assessment beforehand or have a more holistic understanding of the kind of contextual data you're using here. And what we're also seeing are more and more severe consequences with regards to data not complying with data protection regulations. And in this case, for example, the FTC not only fined Weight Watchers for illegally collecting kids' sensitive health data, but ordered them to destroy any algorithms with that data. And we all know how expensive it might be to train models. We all know that you might not understand all of the data that you used either. And so doing this preemptively can prevent some fairly serious repercussions. These problems are very complex in that personally identifiable information is a fairly extensive list. And a lot of folks don't necessarily understand that direct identifiers are one type of personal information that you need to take care of, and that's normally what people consider as PII, namely entire names, credit card numbers, social security numbers. But then quasi-identifiers are also considered personally identifiable information in that when combined together, they exponentially increase the risk of re-identification. And so that's things like religion, sexual orientation, approximate location, and in some cases, those are actually also sensitive categories of sensitive personal information. And these categories of sensitive data, actually, under certain regulations, you're not actually allowed to process them. And so something else that you need to be wary of when you're doing things like your privacy impact assessments and understanding what is in your data. And another interesting point here is that a lot of those quasi-identifiers, like the location, like a social, like a postal code or a zip code or religion or nationality, those can actually lead to bias in the results of your models. And there's quite a bit of newer work that's showcasing how you'll get vastly different responses depending on which nationality you put in for an individual that's mentioned in a prompt, or also with regards to whether or not you put in a disability within a prompt. So something to be very wary of when you are training models or using them for inference. And the reason that this is a really hard problem is generally because you're dealing with very large volumes of data. So you need something that scales. There's generally that patchwork of privacy regulations that you need to constantly keep track of. You're often dealing with multilingual and multinational data. So different addresses, for example, are represented in different ways in Japan versus the US, and other regions as well for even national identity numbers. Then there's can be mixing and matching of languages, so things like Singlish or Spanglish or Franglais. And then there you might be dealing with a ton of different types of documents and different types of content as well. So you need something that generalizes really well for these. You might be dealing with things like audio. So if you are dealing with audio, you'll be seeing disfluencies in speech. You'll be seeing automatic speech recognition errors. And in this a variety of documents, you might be using optical character recognition to determine what it is that they say, in which case you might be dealing with OCR errors as well. So it has to be something that's very robust for the particular use case that you're using. And when it comes to data minimization within large language models, considering the amount of data that we're unlocking, that 80 to 90% of the data that we've collected that Steve was mentioning, there are multiple locations where you will want to think about privacy. If you are using a third-party LLM, for example, you will want to reduce the amount of personal information that's being sent to that third-party large language model, either for creating RAG embeddings, for training or fine-tuning, or in the prompt. You'll want to, even if you are getting data from a user directly into your own organization, you might want to sanitize the prompts so that you're not getting information that you didn't want stored in your servers in the first place. For example, healthcare data that a bank might not want.
Yeah, to double click on that
Yeah.
real quick. We've spoken to a couple customers where well, try not to provide any possible re-identification, but they're like, hey, we think we've got a lot of emails with social security numbers in it, because someone will email them and say, hey, I'm having a problem with this record, or they'll send them a screenshot of someone's criminal history. Yeah, I'm not making this up. So I remember having a call with someone, and I said, well, I don't, I basically said, you can't be our customer. We take a lot of steps to make sure we don't ingest that, but the original sin was on the person sending it to you. First, the person sending you that was violating their own company or their own, in this case, state's policy, probably, about sending this data. And then you were receiving it and violating your own policy. And we're not going to be the third recipient of this, even though we clean most of this stuff in memory. But going back to your point about certain data you're not allowed to process, and why I like this topic is I would say any business that has any chance of accepting sensitive personal information. And I think I wanted to interrupt you there and talk about some of that data. You said you're not even allowed to process, which might be like someone's sexual orientation. You're not allowed to process it at all, perhaps. I'm not familiar with that. We don't process that for any reason. That's not what we do. But if you're somehow able, there is a reason for someone to send you that data. They are sending that data to you in an insecure format, and it is sitting in someone's inbox or in a spreadsheet somewhere that's not supposed to be sitting there in the first place. So you already have an original sin. And then these folks go, in a lot of companies we've talked to, they'll say, yeah, we're experimenting with AI. We took all of our emails and we dumped them into X. And you're like, well, you just violated just about every single thing that your privacy compliance team has put on your website. But anyway, I thought that might be interesting to bring that up. Like, you can't just assume that you can take a big chunk of data and just dump it into a large language model, or and that you even started with clean data to begin with,
Mhm.
or that your customers are sending you clean data, because they definitely aren't.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a really great segue. If you don't understand the kind of training data that you're throwing into the large language model or fine-tuning data, you might end up in ingesting a bunch of that data that you just mentioned, Steve. And if you're training a model with that data, then that could be spewed out in the response. So definitely first understand your data and then clean your data.
And the other aspect of that as well is you receive that. I've always thought that there needs to be an appliance sitting on an email that tag, and we to some degree are doing this, and I could explain that sits in front and doesn't even allow this stuff to enter your organization. But then you hand the keys to all this data to someone in your org who now has been exposed to this data. It's amazing to me. Anyway, we could go on and on about horror stories, I think, but I think the point is you have to take this stuff quite seriously.
Oh yeah. I was talking to somebody who was telling me how one audit they were doing of a customer was showed that they had stored bank records and data, including social security numbers, directly in developers' laptops so that they could use it for training for testing the software that they were building.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I can think of an example where someone took a bunch of these emails, they dumped them into some little AI tool they built, which of course had no privacy cleansing component to it. And then it started spitting outputs to Tableau. And then it ended up in Excel spreadsheets on people's laptops. I mean, it just, yeah, it's not going to work. I think that is one of the, we're both in the AI space. I think that's one of kind of the false promises of AI right now, is that the data part, that the AI part was the hard part and the data part's the easy part.
Mm.
I think it's reversed to some degree. Like, data training is expensive, but it's kind of blocking and tackling. But making sure you're using the right data is very, very difficult. Like you said, because um, we have a customer who's recording phone calls, and we're analyzing, or they're analyzing that data for all sorts of specific issues with their business. But their speech to text, which is not what we do, their speech to text gets their company name as some like vegetable every time, right? But in other contexts, that can be other things that you clearly don't want. And yeah, I'm sure there's things in phone calls uh, that also violate that principle as well. So
Oh, absolutely. And you also never know, even in fairly standardized, if you will, templates like resumes. One thing that came across our desk recently was a social security number that somebody had added to their own resume. And
well, I'll tell you this. This is a little off the subject. My previous company, where it was an HR tech company, it's called Newton. And basically, if you've ever looked for a job and gone to a careers website that was really easy to use, that was our software. If it was hard to use, it was our competitors. But we would have customers that would say, "Can you add social security number to the job application?" And it was a hard no. No. Well, why not? We need it when we hire them. And I'm like, because you hire like 10% of the job applications you get. So 90% of the social security numbers you're collecting, you don't even need to collect. And we're not going to let you do that. And we would lose customers occasionally for that. But um, the kind of Wild West nature of this stuff has to stop, I think. I think we've got to take it more seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. So segueing back to
Yeah.
data visualization in large language models, there's also, as I had mentioned, the de-identification of contextual data for creating RAG embeddings, and finally, as a measure of last resort, for de-identifying the response or flagging anything that you really don't want going to the user. For example, if you accidentally trained on credit card numbers and you don't want to spew that out to the end user, you could just block it out at the response. However, much better to just block it out at training.
I would imagine if you got to that stage, you're you're pretty. I mean, like I think we were talking about how you load someone's name, you use you don't de-identify and you create a training set to look for some specific. In our case, let's say you did it the bad way and you just dumped data in and you want to detect cancellation, and then you got a bunch of cancellations from someone named Rick. Then all of a sudden, some different Rick shows up, and your vector starts saying, "Oh, it looks like Rick is 0.9."
Oh yeah.
It's not, yeah, it's not. It's not only is it bad to do, but it's going to create terrible algorithms on the back end too.
Absolutely. And I was actually speaking to one large org this week that was talking about how they remove personal information also for removing uh, context that doesn't matter to the model. So if it's Rick
Mm,
that filed the complaint versus Nancy who filed the complaint, what they care about is the content of the complaint, not who it is that did the complaining.
sure.
Uh, and just to double tap on if you are using third-party large language models, or if you are wondering how you could block that personal information before it reaches your organization, and you can deploy de-identification directly within either your org or within your customer's organization to strip out the personal information from a prompt, for example. Send that to your large language model or your provider of choice, and then reintegrate the personal information back into the response. So none of that PII ever leaves your environment.
Who chose the Leroy Jenkins reference there? Does anybody know who that Leroy Jenkins is in the message?
My team had to explain it to me.
Okay, yeah, we can move on. It's very old reference. It's kind of funny.
It is funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I do appreciate how what a nerdy reference that is.
Yeah, it is.
Very nerdy.
For the folks on the webinar, it's a World of Warcraft thing or something where years ago some guy named Leroy Jenkins ran in and got all his whole team killed by some dragon or something. But it was a huge kind of viral meme. I think that's right. Isn't that where that comes from? Right?
I think you're right. And
Yeah. Okay.
I want him as chief charge coordinator. You know what I mean?
Get it. Even better. They did it. Good. Perfect.
Brilliant. Do you want to take us through how Sturdy does it, Steve?
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think I got to this at the beginning, but the basic gist of what the basic problem I want to solve and what we want to solve with Sturdy is that I feel like just about every business in the world wants to understand its customers better. I think there's too many walls in place of understanding what's truly driving people. Venture capitalists love it when you talk about revenue. Um, I've always come at this kind of revenue issue from a strange place. Like if you have the best product and you treat your customers well, revenue will happen instead of worrying about revenue and then going backwards. But I'm a weirdo that way. But regardless of whether you want to start at the revenue or you want to start at customer or in business efficiency and customer experience, the simple fact of the matter is right now, every time someone gets an email, every time someone conducts or answers a ticket or does a Zoom call or whatever, it's almost certain that there is something relevant not only to that customer at the micro level that one of your account managers somewhere else might want to know, but at a macro level, like humble brag, one of our customers knew the B2B SaaS industry slowed down about 2 years ago. Um, Lots of customers were asking, people were saying, oh, finance is back in the game. We're charging people, we're giving everybody discounts. People are reevaluating their SaaS spend and they're cutting the number of users. Well, they knew this ahead of time because this is what their customers were saying 1,000 times a month. It's humanly impossible to do that, to understand the trends across 65,000 conversations a month, to understand, wow, discounting's on the rise, because 65,000 conversations is being handled by 300 people. So, very long-winded way of saying that we want to analyze and be kind of the intelligence layer on top of all of your systems. How our customers do that is that with Sturdy, we autonomously capture business to customer and customer to business conversations. So as tickets or chats or emails or phone calls are occurring, we're identifying those as customer conversations, and we have built safeguards to make sure that it is only customer conversations. We're not interested in personal emails or citizen watching. I actually saw on one AI site where they talked about citizen something or other. I was like, that gave me the chills. I don't,
One
that's not the way I want to use AI.
one note that under the EU AI Act, public surveillance is not something that you can do with AI legally.
Yeah. Although I did notice, to throw shade at NVIDIA, it said unintended harm. AI should prevent unintended harm. Shouldn't it just say prevent harm? Hmm. It's because intended harm is probably fine for certain AI companies, which is it's the way the world we live in. Getting back to task here, though. So, um, we talk about the data side, and I would say a lot of the effort we put into building this business is ingesting this data from any source that it may reside, and that's actually quite a bit more difficult than you would think. And I won't bore you with that. Um, and then as this data is coming in, the first thing that sits in front of that is in a partnership with you folks is any SPI, any data that they're absolutely not supposed to have. And most of our customers will say, oh, we don't have any of this data. We're not supposed to have an email, and it's not supposed to be in tickets. And by the way, if it's in Salesforce, you're supposed to have a special version of Salesforce. I don't know if you knew this. We have really nasty data SPI, and you buy this more expensive version of Salesforce. But they'll tell you they don't have it, but they do. And so as that is coming, we have a flag that says, nope, this is bad. And we delete it in memory. It never actually touches our system, which is a huge benefit, because we never want it in our system. It's kind of going back to the Newton example. I don't want social security numbers because I don't think you need to get them, but I also don't want it in my system. I just don't want it because then it can get stolen. So if we can prevent getting the data that we don't want, then we don't have to. I mean, we're still very worried about a breach. Of course, that would kill our business and destroy our market. No one wants to buy from somebody who breached, but it's also about not analyzing and not storing data that you don't need to conduct your business because it's just dangerous.
Mhm.
And so as that data is coming across the wire, we're ensuring that we don't get it in the first place. And then as we get it, we also make sure that titles, email addresses, title is a thing too, right? Company someone works for, personal email, phone, all of that other information is, and I'm not trying to hedge here, depending to our end users, they see the full text version of that, but to our models, it is all cleaned and redacted. And I guess redacted, it's anonymized. It's not pseudonymized as it's going into these models. So you can't reverse engineer it out. What's kind of nice about what we do is there's kind of another level of protection on top of that, because we are not a large language model. So we have partnerships with large language models, to be clear, but we've also built proprietary language classifiers. So if you say, wow, this feature you launched was really terrible, and I'm going to need to think about renewing when we're going to renew our contract, right? We recognize that, we classify that. There's a vector that fires and says, this is a unhappy customer, unhappy bug cancellation. And so we don't spit data back out. We just hit a threshold and say, here, Like we say here, we label items based on the probability that a conversation indicates a risk, opportunity, or data point. Now we clean using private AI all that data going into those models because we don't want that data in there. It just would. There's no need for us to have that in there. And the other thing that we do in like support situations is if our customer says, "I need help with something," our support personnel are viewing an anonymized version of that customer's UI. So one other dirty secret about software is in most companies, there is someone in the company that can view all your data in your system. I have a theory that there's someone in Salesforce that can view every single thing in Salesforce. Don't sue me, Salesforce. I'm not saying that's the case, but you have the database key, and the database key unlocks that stuff. But in this user interface environment, if someone wants to have a discussion with a customer about their account, we can ensure that they are not able to see titles and email addresses and names, which is quite cool. And of course, our customers can say, we don't want you to look at that at all. But in every one of our customers, they'll say, "Hey, can you walk me through how this works?" And sure. This is not necessarily germane to private AI, but again, like we mentioned, only customer-facing data can be analyzed, and that's the data between a customer and a business. We don't classify people, and we do not make decisions. I think that's another kind of inflection point for AI from a larger theme, is you really cross a threshold of the ethics of AI, and you need to be much more careful and circumspect in how you use it when it starts making decisions. And a decision could be whether to give someone a mortgage or not, because the inputs that you're likely giving that are biased. Going back to the HR tech days, we had customers that wanted us to analyze resumes and score them, and I refused to do that. One, because I think it's not super useful, and another thing, I kind of think it's your job to read someone's resume if they sent it to you. I'm weird that way. But you're also making a decision based on an algorithm that's going to be fundamentally that in theory is based on people who have interviewed with you in the past, who have gotten hired, and then they go up some classifier that says they're better at their job. But that input is purely subjective because their boss is saying they're good or not. And then you're using that to create a resume screener, and it's just not what we do.
In certain jurisdictions, you're actually not allowed to not have a human in the loop when it comes to life-changing decisions, like whether or
Yeah.
not somebody should get insurance or credit, for example. So something to keep in mind for folks
Yeah,
working.
we're very much in the camp again that you have all of this content in your business, you analyze this in 1% of it. How much more effectively could you manage your business if it was all analyzed and classified? We're talking 100x, and you go from 1% to maybe it's not 100%, but you go from 1 to 2, you double the amount of data. From 1% to 2%, you double. From 1% to 3%, you triple it. So even if we were doing 25% of your data, you're 25xing the amount of information you have about your customers. I don't know about you, but if I had 25 times more information about anything in this world, I think I would be more effective at knowing whether it was working or not. And to do that in a manner that human beings don't have to do it. So the next slide, I think I think we've kind of covered this. With private AI, we detect it and destroy PHI and SPII in memory, which is important to us. We also can alert our customers as well and say, by the way, you sent us an email. You tried to send us an email that had a social security number in it, and we caught it. I'd like to think they went and deleted it off their server. I think our customers do. But
I would love
you
to know
can't.
the results
Here's
of
the
the.
point. Here's the other point, Patricia. If you aren't using private AI, you aren't going to know that it's there, and you aren't going to delete it. And if you get hacked and someone steals all this data, you won't even know what they stole. Did they steal
Very
social
true.
security numbers? I don't
Yeah,
know. Maybe they did. I don't
we
know. I
do get
think
brought
someone.
in post hacks to discover what it is that somebody stole. It's much better if you do that before something
Yeah,
happens.
I think if you get brought in post hack, you should charge 10 times more. Post hack service. And you just, yeah. Hey, if you're dumb enough to not know what's in there before the hack, it's going to cost you a lot more to know after the hack. I'm just, don't put me on your marketing team. I don't think it'd be a good idea. Oh, we talked about this. Our language classifiers are non-generative. Um, they only generate labels based um, on the likelihood of a conversation containing a business relevant topic. Um, we also do summarized text, and we have a bunch of not to get overly boring here, but we've got a lot of safeguards in place there around about how we send prompts, what body of text is summarized, what type of data we put into the payload. I think the other thing about what we're doing is we're only detecting topics that are relevant in a business context. We're not detecting whether a person has a high social score. This is simply, is this customer, what is this customer's issue? What are the trends and themes around that? And we feel like we can do that in a very privacy compliant manner because we know what data is coming in and out because of private AI.
I really love the that you narrow the focus to the ethical use of the technology as well, because I know there is a lot that you could be doing with it, and you're already doing a lot with your technology, and being able to um, have your customers and user actually trust the technology that they're using makes a huge difference on um, how AI is going to succeed in this world. We can't have more people scared of what can
Yeah,
happen.
I think AI. The I'm an old duffer. I can remember when the internet came around. I can actually, in my first sales job, we had a fax machine, and we just called folks. And I remember saying, I'm never going to email a prospect because it's too impersonal, right? Um, Ironically, I think that AI has made it so easy to email people that no one reads emails anymore, and that actually calling them might work better now because I don't know about you, I get so many AI emails that, oh, did you go to University of New Hampshire? Did you ever have ice cream at XYZ? And you're like, oh, geez. I think where we're at with AI, and that point is it kind of hits home. Is like we are using at the beginning of the internet, we used the internet in ways that were very similar, that were just made the things we were already doing in our everyday lives a little bit easier. That was like a simile.
Mm.
Um, but a lot of value was created in things that we never even thought was possible. And that's like Facebook, right? Like whether you think Facebook is great for the world or not, it's another debate. I think where we are with AI, like as a customer, like a chat bot for me, sweet. Not my favorite, right? We're using AI in a lot of applications to just do the things we're already doing a little bit cheaper or a little bit faster. But I think where AI is going to end up, and I think in like Sturdy's case, it fundamentally changes the way you run your business. Um, like if you want to know something about a customer with, uh, you know, 5 years ago, you'd get five people in a room. You'd open up your email inboxes. You'd say, what was that phone call about? And did you talk to so and so? And let's check Zendesk. And oh, let's check Salesforce. And let's check HubSpot. Let's check Slack because we maybe, and that AI is not to toot our own horn, but like that's not going to be a thing. You're not going to need to do that. You're just going to go and say, hey, here's every conversation that was collected in a privacy aware, secure environment. Can you summarize it for me? Can you alert me if anything goes wrong? Like, and the amount of time that you'll add back to your day will just, it's like the amount of time added to your day by not having to drive to go buy whatever you buy on Amazon. That's going to be the equivalent for what AI is going to do for at least what we think Sturdy is going to do for your business. Before Amazon, whenever you wanted some pencils, you had to drive somewhere and you wasted an hour to get some pencils. Right now, whenever you want to know what's going on with a customer, you spend an hour gathering information and searching for stuff and finding their contract. And with Sturdy, you'll spend a minute or 30 seconds. And I think that's there's going to be there's some bad actors in the internet, of course, and there's going to be bad actors in AI, but I'm not as scared about it as most people, I think,
Hmm.
as
Yeah,
long as they do it right. Yeah.
and you're right. It does take a long time to collect that data. It's very excited about this technology.
Well, the data input side's I, where people are doing it wrong isn't on the AI side, they're doing it on the data side, right?
Mm.
So not only is it, you know, yes, you can use AI to do nefarious things. Um, you can create weird videos of political candidates or whatever. But um, I think where most companies are getting it wrong today is the CTO has an AI project that they want to start, and they just grab a bunch of customer conversations and dump it into an LLM, and that we got to get beyond that.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right. Well,
All right.
yeah, thank you so much, Steve. This has been a lot of fun to talk with you about your use of privacy by design, essentially, within your product, and how you're using Sturdy to speed up your customers' processes, and how you're even improving their privacy posture just by having Sturdy scan what kind of data is passing through. So that was really cool to hear. Um, any final words you want to share with the audience?
Oh, as you've probably noticed, I'm very wordy. I'll say thanks for listening. Hey, and Patricia, thanks so much for having me on these webinar. Do we call them podcasts these days? But I truly appreciate it. It was great, and wish
Thank you.
Private AI the best.
Likewise for Sturdy. Thank you so much.
All
It was
right.
really fun.